Hello and welcome back to my Kerbal Space Program NASA series. This episode has obviously taken an extremely long amount of time, both because I have not had time to play. Both my big flights that I've got were extremely long, and I really didn't have the... This is the second time I've run through this one, because the first edit of this was literally 25 minutes of me docking this stupid supply craft. And when I had it done, I watched it and I just about fell asleep watching my own stuff. So I went ahead and flew another mission, but that took another long night of maneuvering. But I think I got a much more interesting video put together. Definitely more interesting than it had been. So this is, once again, boring orbital rendezvous stuff, trying to get this mammoth supply craft within docking distance of the Hermes. Just kind of noodling around, trying to get a close encounter that I can be happy with. Unfortunately, I had this thing way overbuilt with RCS jets, and so every tiny little maneuver, you can watch that monopropellant number just crash every time I do something as simple as trying to turn. Leaving SAS engaged while I'm trying to do it was not beneficial at all. In fact, it probably had a lot to do with me running out of monopropellant. I wasn't totally out, but I was fairly certain I wasn't going to have enough to complete the docking maneuver, so I came up with this plan on the fly. Sent the Soyuz out. I'm going to refuel the Hermes monopropellant stocks from it. Undock, back away, point myself at the Hermes and the supply vessel, and just gun it. Just burning in on RCS because this thing's a lot more efficient with it. I did everything really slowly because once I ran out of monopropellant, I became really conservative with my fuel burns, just main engines and RCS. So this was a really slow docking maneuver. The sun had time to rise. Just bringing it in like every other docking maneuver ever performed in this series. Once that gets latched down, it's just a quick matter of pumping over the monopropellant into the Hermes resupply craft. Kept a little bit of monopropellant on the Soyuz because that is going to be kind of important when my crew needs to come home. Once again, just wildly flailing around, wasting fuel. If I fly this same design, and there's no guarantee I will, I am definitely going to be cutting down on the number of RCS ports there, because it's huge and it maneuvers very easily. I can definitely do away with a couple rows of jets there. This is all 4 times acceleration, just because it was long, tedious, and not terribly interesting to watch. But I did want to show kind of most of the maneuver. You start transferring fuel and oxidizer over while simultaneously draining out any waste products that are on board the Hermes from the crew. Transferring food, water, life support, all that fun stuff from the resupply vessel. I'm torn because I really need such a massive fuel tank to refuel the Hermes, but doing food and life support supplies really don't require such a massive vessel. So I either need to fly 2 separate craft, one for fuel and oxidizer and another cheaper one for life support, or just be happy with what I've got and try to redesign it to be a little more efficient. Transferring the oxygen actually took quite a while, even at 100 times transfer rate from TAC fuel balancer. Once that was done, I decided to go ahead and bring in the Soyuz, deploy that communication antenna just in case I happen to drift out of the sweet spot range of my comms network. Once again, trying to be really efficient because this thing doesn't have a whole lot of monopropellant left. So just going to try to get a close encounter and not burn into the Hermes. Just kind of let orbital dynamics do their thing. It's always more efficient to do it that way than to burn straight at something and then try to brake at the last moment. It's also a little safer. I have yet to have a collision, and that could be why. Just kind of floating through. Docking up. And all in a day's work. These were just mind-numbingly long operations to perform. Having to do this in real time. I did use time warp a little bit, but when you're docking, there's only so much you can warp. So this thing, having it had its job completed, time to back away and do the deorbit burn. I had designed it to try and capture it for return. Really didn't think that was going to work too well. If I really want to get serious about bringing this thing back, I'm probably going to have to put some parachutes down on the bottom so that it will come down on its side, because coming down vertically, it's just a little too hair-raising. I was hoping for a water splashdown, but I wasn't paying too close attention to it. Tried ejecting the engine and fuel pod, and that did not quite go as planned. I don't know if I think it was a collider mesh issue, honestly. I was trying to wiggle free and knock it off, but didn't quite succeed. Interestingly enough, it came disconnected under physical time warp, which usually doesn't let things phase through one another, so I don't know what was up with that. It's a little bit darker than usual coming down. That's because I'm halfway through an eclipse, apparently. And I'm thinking if I'd been on level ground, this would have gone a lot better. Unfortunately, as it was, I was still able to get a lot of the stuff back, but the fuel tank was actually one of the more expensive parts of this, and so losing it really hurt my efficiency. Couple days later, the rest of the crew is loaded into a Soyuz and launched on their way to Hermes. Yet another multi-engine Proton-style launch, which is totally a waste of money. That's like 6 engines I'm throwing away each time, but I still think it looks cool, so we're going to keep it. Booster engine cutoff, fairing separation, ditch the booster, unfold the solar panels and communications array, and then just get this thing ready to maneuver in for its docking. Ended up chasing Hermes around the planet a couple times, but that's just kind of standard fare by now. Set it up for my target. Start programming my maneuver node here. And because I was behind it, I left my Apple apps below. I had kind of an oblong orbit, so I could catch up to it faster. But you can still see that was nearly 3 hours of flight time to make the rendezvous. Not 3 hours real time, obviously. A lot of that wasn't under time warp. Still felt like forever, though. It's another slow, steady, patient docking maneuver. No sense rushing things and possibly breaking stuff. Take a moment to reload, or to load, and then everybody's happy, joined up, time to move the crew over. And if it sounds like I'm talking really fast, there's probably, now that I think, but there's really not a reason for it. I have just enough time to finish recording this before I've got to jet off to my engineering physics class, which is actually taught by a former NASA ground controller, my physics professor. He's a really cool guy, actually, and we've done some flight lesson things because he's also a pilot flight instructor. and he's using some of the class as sort of guinea pigs so he can get his final certification. So that's been interesting. I haven't actually had been able to get too involved in those. I've done some ground school things. I have not actually flown a plane yet. So, but even just having the ground school stuff was really useful for me because when I play Microsoft Flight Simulator 10, I'm pretty good. I'm a pretty decent pilot when it comes to simulators, but ground operations and protocol just kind of escape me. So, because they're never really a very important part of simulation unless you want them to be. So, and I would someday like to have my private pilot's license, so I figured it's something I might want to get a little more acquainted with. Get the two Soyuz nudged together so they can just wait patiently while the crew is off traipsing around Minmus. Then becomes a matter of trying to turn this big heavy thing after programming the maneuver for it. Setting Minmus as the target. Just fudging around with the maneuver nodes. I've gotten to the point where I don't really... There is a way to catch Minmus right as it hits the ascending or descending node. That takes way too much patience and planning for me, and so I just kind of adapt and change my orbital inclination on the way in to catch it wherever it might be. Finally getting this thing turned onto the maneuver node and getting ready for the very, very long burn once again. Not proud of myself that this is the second time I've had to go out to Minmus because of a lander failure due to... I probably should have foreseen that those fuel lines would have messed up either way. So, interestingly enough, reading the daily Kerbal as I've been trying to keep myself appraised of how the game development is going, even as I've been buried under calculus, physics, and all the other fun subjects I'm taking this semester. It seems like I will have played the game through a period where they have adopted 64-bit, realized it was too buggy, abandoned 64-bit, gone from alpha to beta, beta to release, and then having their first post-release patch readopting 64-bit before I got this thing finished. So, once again, I am fully committed to getting this finished. I'm just going to be very slow at it until probably at least for the next month or so while I finish up school this semester. Because the burn was so long, the maneuver node I had previously set just really wasn't applicable. So I had to do a little more adjusting just to catch Minmus on the way around. Once I was in the SOI, had to burn normal or anti-normal for a little bit so I could kind of get an equatorial orbit going on. The inclination change from Kerbin to Minmus is not insignificant, but this thing has got a ton of delta V, so pretty trivial operation for the Hermes. I was trying to get it exact, but eventually just realized I'd have to be happy with what I could get. So went ahead and circularized when the opportunity arose. And because this thing accelerates so quickly, you can tell it just does not burn exactly on my projected maneuver nodes. I'm cool with that. If I'm off by a couple dozen kilometers or so, it's not the end of the world. Waiting for periaps and apoaps to flip around. Since I'm in a reasonably circular orbit, time to move the crew over to the lander. Probably could have gone for a little lower orbit. I don't necessarily know why I stayed so high on second viewing of this. I'm sure I had my reasons, either that or I just wasn't paying attention. I think I was a little overconfident in my Delta V requirements to land on Minmus. Before we set out, need to unstrut this thing from the Hermes so that it can actually undock. I have not tried undocking with those struts attached. I'm fairly certain that would not go very well. So, just figured I'd do it beforehand and save myself some heartache. After undocking, time to unlock all the monopropellant tanks so this thing can maneuver and get itself ready for landing. And this is where I really should have started thinking things a little through. This does not have any electrical generation capability, which is not going to be such a big deal landing on Duna, because it doesn't need a heat shield because Duna's atmosphere really isn't thick enough for it to need one. And it won't need electrical generation ability because its main job, excuse me, is literally just to get the crew down to the surface. Once it's down, I can pretty much just forget it even exists. Until then, though, this is a slightly different use than it's intended for, landing on Minmus and coming back. So this thing's landing without any electrical generation capability. I don't think those engines don't even have alternators. So it was halfway through my landing sequence that I realized I was bleeding off electrical engineering or energy and was not going to actually be able to stay long on the surface. Yet another snafu. I honestly don't think my time away from the game caused that. I just don't think I was thinking about it. Very slow, painfully boring landing on Minmus, and as luck would have it, I happen to be setting down pretty much within a stone's throw of a previously landed unmanned probe. I was a little frustrated with this because that meant I wasn't going to be bringing back as much science as I had intended, but at the same time, I have not done crew reports or surface samples or any of that stuff, so it's not too big of a deal. Still was going to get more than enough to unlock that final tier of parts needed for my Venture Star. And I have a couple processors unlocked for the Cacti Space Telescope, so I honestly think before I bring Venture Star online, we're going to do one last big send-off for the Space Shuttle, because the final shuttle mission in 2011 was Atlantis flying to service the Hubble Space Telescope. That seems like kind of a fitting end for my shuttle program, so we're going to go up there, put a new advanced processor on there, and some other fun things to update it, and then we will retire the space shuttle with fanfare and style. I've been very happy with the way it's performed, but it's time to move into the next century and deploy Venture Star and start flying SSTOs for the first time. And I think Venture Star is going to take over for the Soyuz as far as taking crew to and from the Hermes once it's time for the Duna mission, because Venture Star is just going to be a lot more efficient. It'll be an SSTO, so the only expenses I'm going to incur are going to be my fuel costs, especially if I am adamant about landing on the runway, as I have been with the shuttle. On any other planet, I wouldn't have landed at this angle, but I wasn't too concerned because with the low gravity, the reaction wheels are more than enough to keep it planted in an upright orientation, keep it from rolling over and heading down the hill. Since at this point I was well aware this had to be a very brief stay, instead of getting the 6-crew group photo I was hoping for, I pretty much just sent one poor little guy out to try and get all my data. But, once again, underestimating the curvature of this hill, he just ended up sliding down it. I was starting to get a little panicked there, because if he gets going fast enough, it'll breach his physics threshold and kill the poor little guy. Time to do an EVA report. Gonna go ahead and take the time to plant a flag. Seemed only appropriate. This is kind of a lie. It's first successful Minmus landing, but not the first landing attempt. I don't even remember what I typed. Aw, little poem. Okay, enough of that. Time to book it back to the lander. And has been typical of my entire Minmus operation. Not even this could go smoothly. Something about trying to land crew in an inverted position. If you were watching, you will have noticed that the dipole antenna is gone. I freaked out a little bit when I saw the explosion, but that was all that we lost here. So, and I don't have any intention of flying this thing unmanned at this point, so that's totally cool. Unfortunately, he goes sprawling down the mountain once again. Thankfully, that dipole antenna is a Kerbal Attachment System compatible part, so I will be able to replace it down the line if I feel the need. I'm going to try one more time, or as many times as it takes, because we are leaving no Kerbals behind on this mission, especially when they're carrying valuable scientific data, which makes the whole endeavor, you know, worth it. Thankfully, gets back on board without too much drama. And with the battery at this stage getting rather low, it's one of the downsides of having Hermes in such a high orbit is that its velocity is so low, it was very difficult for me to predict which launch angle I should have gone with. And so I just kind of eyeball it and go with my best guess. Which was unfortunately not quite good enough. I was quite a ways ahead of the Hermes, but I had enough residual battery power left that I still had options. Unfortunately, I burned out all my fuel and oxidizer on my main engines, leaving me with just monopropellant. Thankfully, I'm over Minmus, which you can do quite a few interesting maneuvers with just RCS because the orbital velocity is so low. It doesn't take a lot of delta V to really change your orbit. You see I'm still able to push the apoaps up to Hermes' orbital altitude. But the rendezvous is completely off. I was wildly mistaken as to how that was going to work out. Thankfully, I did have enough monopropellant. I was able to get this thing into an orbit instead of a suborbital trajectory, in which case the whole crew would have been lost. Just had to time warp over to the apoaps and get properly oriented. And then just burn on monopropellant until the periaps came up above Minmus' surface. Now, there's quite a bit of electric charge left, but keep in mind that will not be recharging, and they are not going to be rendezvousing with Hermes on this pass in any event. So it's going to need, I'm going to need every second I got to effect a daring rescue attempt, which is unfortunately going to have to wait for the next episode. So stay tuned, thank you for watching, and this series, once again, will be finished someday. So thank you very much.